app that you can ask questions through this presentation if you wish. So if you want, you can either just go to the website and put in the number or scan the QR code. It should just take you to the same website address there. This is just for submitting questions during this session. I'll have something different for the next session after the afternoon coffee break. So I'll just give you a second to bring up this information here. There's also the option, if you wish, we can pass a microphone and ask questions, but this allows you to put in longer questions into the text, and then I can look at it towards the end. It also gives the option here, if you wish to vote up other people's questions. So if many questions come in, we can then prioritize the questions by what people think is the most important ones to ask. So I can bring this up again later if you need. So this session is about cybersecurity. We're going to be looking at cybersecurity issues, problems, challenges, specifically targeting for Bangladesh and the research and education sector. Main thing that we're looking at here is that we're looking now and into the future. Some of these things you may have seen before. I'm not claiming to be some visionary that's coming up with brand new ideas, but I am taking my knowledge and experience, putting it together and putting it forward as a single presentation. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is this sort of change of how information security has been changing over the years. We've typically been looking at walled defenses, firewalls, network security, things like that, and looking at that being the main protection factor across a lot of systems. But what we're dealing with is we're dealing with a world where things are changing. I'm specifically not using war imagery here, but if anybody has been following the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, you'll know that drones, maybe not drones with cameras on it, but drones are being used very heavily in physical kinetic warfare. And this is a huge change in the way that a lot of that battle is being fought. Whereas previously you had wall defenses and the people attacking would hit a wall and they could be defended in that way. But if you have drones and swarms of drones and you have so many threats coming at you, that you have to be thinking about changes in defense and how that's going to be changing and what's the next evolution that's going to be coming through and how can solid defenses be helping you with that. So who am I? My name is Jamie Gillespie. I'm a cybersecurity professional. I've been in dedicated security roles for 26 years. And before that, I worked for an internet provider back in Canada, was working in general IT roles, network control center, setting up a web hosting team, and working on the internal office network and security team. Companies I've worked for, going back in time, Unet Canada, unfortunately, they don't exist anymore, but they were bought out by WorldCom and Verizon. So technically, sort of like Verizon. I worked for Offcert when I moved to Australia. That's the Computer Emergency Response Team. Worked there for about 7 or 8 years. Worked at Google in Australia as well in their security operations team. Was a security architect for Macquarie Telecom and Macquarie Cloud Services. And most recently, I worked approximately 8 years at APAN61 as a senior security specialist there as well. Outside of cybersecurity, I am an advanced responder with St. John Ambulance. I've been volunteering with St. John for, I think I was a young teenager when I started their cadet program. So not only have I been looking at internet risks and online risks and threats to safety in that way, I also take my risk assessments as well as my incident response into the physical world as well, dealing with major events. This was just recently in Sydney for the New Year's Eve fireworks, which was a massive event that also had connotations if you had followed that there was a shooting in Sydney at Bondi Beach not too long earlier. And of course, there was a lot of additional thoughts and security measures in place for that large event there. Additionally, on the legal side of things, I am also a Justice of the Peace in Australia, or at least in the state of Queensland. That's a voluntary role within the Department of Justice and Attorney General, but it is basically like a low-level magistrate helping out with a lot of, simple legal tasks like that as well. So where are we at right now in Bangladesh? Uncomfortable truth. You are being targeted. You are being targeted from all directions. You're being targeted from within your country. You're being targeted from other countries within the region and internationally as well. Bangladesh can be seen as a bit of a hacker playground, can be seen as an easy target. Ways that a lot of the younger hackers or script kiddies may be coming in, finding easy targets and going around and going, there isn't the international laws that we need to worry about, or Bangladesh is going through their own conflict. So if I go in and do things damaging, it's not going to be a problem for me. You also have to look that Bangladesh is also a hacker breeding ground. There is a lot of really smart youth in this country that are learning about IT, they're learning about security, and they're learning it from an offensive perspective. They're looking at it, at the moment, playing around, maybe doing things illegally, maybe not understanding that they're illegal. Maybe in the future, they will become great offensive security and penetration testers. But at the moment, their frontal brain is not developed fully yet, and they're not looking at the consequences. They're looking about how can they explore the internet and how can they do damaging things to different levels of that. You also have to look at within universities, within the education sector, that you are training IT, you are training security people, and they are learning these things as well. So not only within the country, but within the organizations and institutes that you were working for, you have the enemy is within. There's the joke from a lot of the American movies, the horror movies, where somebody receives a phone call late at night and it's the axe murder or something. And, it's always the call came from within the house. The scary thing that the axe murderer was within the house. Well, that is what you're experiencing within universities. That's not specific to Bangladesh. That is something that is across universities across the world, is that universities are a place where young people are learning technology and they're testing their limits of what they can do. You also are dealing with supply chains. Supply chains within the educational sphere that we're dealing with here is that universities can be seen as a supply chain connection going outbound to governments. A lot of research is being done within education institutes that it flows on and is used by governments. Can be seen as direct connections, or it may not even be real connections, but there's a perceived connection of going from the education sector and universities to government. And that's an important thing to understand, is that in cybersecurity, as well as cybercrime and cyber warfare, it doesn't have to be a real connection. All it takes is a perceived connection, and that will then be attacked and abused. But for supply chains, you also have to remember that an educational institute is a regular operating business. So you are using vendors, you are using external support, and you are the consumer of supply chain risks as well. So you're sort of sitting in the middle. You've got the risks coming in from vendors, but then you've got the risks, real or perceived, of you connecting through to government as well. You're also being attacked looking at CPU and bandwidth resources, network resources. Bangladesh is seen as a very developing economy when it comes to internet access. High-speed access, particularly within the research and education sphere, that's what this conference of APAN is all about. High-speed advanced networks. And that is seen as a very juicy target. Additionally, all the CPU resources, running high performance computing, running GPU clusters, these are good targets for attackers or people wishing to abuse your networks. If you wanted to do some Bitcoin mining, the cheapest way to do it is to run it on somebody else's computers. And where are you going to get the most money? The most number of computers, the most number of resources that you can find, education. And again, that's not specific to this country, but it is something that we do have to be aware of in this education space. And of course, you're dealing with geopolitics. Bangladesh is right in the middle of a lot of things going on geopolitically, not even just within your own country, but within the region as well. And it's something that is basically putting a bullseye onto the economy. Again, this isn't specific to Bangladesh. A lot of countries have that bullseye on it from different perspectives. No longer is the world just the black and white, the good, the bad, the blue and the red, attacking each other. It's multi-directional. It's going every economy to every other country, every region to other region, and within regions as well. So where are we now and what can we do now? So this is looking at the now aspect of things. So shadow IT, one of the biggest ones that we're dealing with. Shadow IT that we've got here, it's easy to spot properly managed IT. You've got properly managed SaaS systems. You're running your own. You may get services through BDREN. There's a lot of well-managed IT, but you can't completely ban the shadow IT that's out there. We've got the central IT as the tip of the iceberg. That's what you can see. You've got great visibility over the things that you are running, that you are operating and managing yourself. What you don't see way down is the larger iceberg of shadow IT and what is happening. The example here, a server sitting under a professor's desk. It gets set up for an experiment, maybe has a public IP address. It's forgotten about. It's not managed. Who knows what it's running and where it's actually located. That is one example. One of the harder examples that we're looking at here is the shadow SaaS. Software as a service. This is a challenge for organizations worldwide in all industry sectors that they have to deal with. You may have Microsoft 365 as your approved cloud platform. Your mail, your calendar, your OneDrive, SharePoint, all of these things should go in there, but people have access to Google Drive. And a lot of information gets stored off in these unauthorized SaaS applications. This is, of course, then compounded with the AI introduction that we've got now. AI is being fed so much information, it's basically cloud storage. You may have your approved AI, whether it be local LLMs that you're operating or approved, if you're using Microsoft 365, for example, you've got the Copilot and everything from there. But people still have access to external systems, Claude, Perplexity, Gemini, and on and on and on. So many of these SaaS applications. And again, people are feeding information into it. Not just text information, not just asking it to create, funny pictures and things like that. They are taking sensitive documents, sensitive information, putting it into these systems and asking it to interpret the data and analyze the data, and it's being stored on those systems. That SaaS application shadow IT is a huge problem that is just waiting for a data compromise or a data breach to happen and leaking out so much information. And data breaches for AI LLMs have happened in smaller extents over the past year and even further back, but the past year has been an incredible growth. But the leaking of information, the leaking from one user's conversations to another user's has been happening. These systems are being built very quickly. They are being iterated and improved upon very quickly. And the security is literally being added on as an afterthought. Some of these systems, the security mechanisms, even when brought forward by governments, is still not happening very well. All you have to do is look at the Twitter Grok system, the Grok AI, and the way that it's doing some of the pornographic image generation, basically, that is taking real people's pictures and turning them into pornographic images. They have been told to stop that. And what is their response? Their response was simply to go, oh, only paid users can do that now. Well, that doesn't change the root effect. So these companies are going through so fast in their development that they're not even responding to the laws of different countries. When it comes to shadow IT, containment is probably going to be the best way. Containment over control. You can't control large, unwieldy education institutions. And that's just talking about the staff, not including all the student population as well. Containment is something that may have to be looked at if it's not already. Possibility of having separate VLANs that you can put systems onto for the ones that really shouldn't be talking to anything else. You have people that are adding systems onto the network that are communicating with other local systems that may not be at the same level of data classification or the same level of sensitivity. We're going to talk a little bit later about network segmentation, but this is network segmentation a requirement here as well. If you don't have these separate VLANs that you can push machines off to, they're going to have communication to other systems internally, and you're going to have a bad problem of a lot of these things having a very large single security zone in your network. Another example of one of the easy ones, this is something that I dealt with at APANIC a fair bit with organizations, is IP address blocks that were being blocked from sending email. They were being added onto spam block lists because one IP address on a network was sending out spam. So the whole network gets classed as a spammer. Sometimes it's not just a /24 or /20. Sometimes it's an entire AS number or autonomous system number, which is your entire network. So right now, do you know all of the inbound SMTP traffic that's happening on your network? Inbound should be pretty easy, but now what about outbound? Outbound is a totally different story. You shouldn't be having random computers doing outbound SMTP connections directly. They should be talking to local SMTP servers and then relaying the mail out through known channels that are approved and possibly checking for spam on the way out. If you're not controlling your SMTP traffic, you could have entire mail servers and entire networks that are spam blocked. And those can be difficult to get off of those block lists. Some of them even charging you money if you want speedy removal services. Others just not listening to you whatsoever. This is another one that has been changing for a few years now. The new perimeter is identity. We used to be looking at firewalls. Firewalls were the way of protecting our network, and that worked for quite a while. When you started having more remote connections, people working from home, all of these services that are available, SaaS applications that are totally outside of your network, the firewall is no longer enough as that perimeter boundary. It still has a very good place for blocking certain things, but the actual network boundary is moving to an identity as your perimeter, the identity of every single user on your network. And this is the basis for zero trust networking, of course. But for zero trust and identity perimeters to work properly, we have to have strong identity controls. Single factor authentication is long dead. Everybody should understand that. If you don't have two-factor or multi-factor authentication for everything that is authenticating a user, then you are going to have problems. Data breaches, reused passwords, all of these things are causing huge headaches for single-factor authentication services still. The other thing to look at, though, is what are the second factors or the multi-factors that we're using? SMS, one-time passwords, are easy to use because everybody has a mobile phone, but there are inherent security risks. For starters, they are phishing susceptible. People can get SMS messages and then they can be told by other people, oh, you need to give me that code, tricking them, telling them different things. They're not phishing resistant. Additionally, SMS can be diverted by someone stealing SIM cards. They can do SIM swapping attacks. They can steal mobile numbers by going in and reassigning that SIM and that phone number to a different SIM system. Phishing resistant multi-factor authentication is what's needed primarily for the critical functions. You know, if you needed to hone in on where is the priority, look at your admin departments, look at your finance departments, look at your critical systems for staff, and look at raising the level of multi-factor authentication for those areas, staff, and systems. When we talk about phishing resistant multi-factor, passkeys is one of the free and easy ways that you can do things. Free in the sense that you don't have to buy software, you do have to support it, so there's a human cost for support, but passkeys can be cheaper than YubiKeys. YubiKeys is, of course, some of the highest level, you know, having a physical cryptographic device that is phishing resistant. There's no way to phish a full cryptographic key out of YubiKeys. It has to be the actual website that it's talking to. And, you know, if you needed to go back down to a lower level than that, time-based one-time passwords, you know, the Google Authenticator, the changing 6-digit codes every 30 seconds, that's still better than SMS. So if there's ways to move people to those systems, great. But remember, Google Authenticator is not the end goal. It's still susceptible to phishing. You need to be moving to something that is cryptographically signed only for the systems that will be accepting that authentication. Passkeys, YubiKeys, FIDO, U2F, all of those standards are the phishing-resistant cryptographic areas. The fun picture here is you can see this was Hawaii or Guam is one of the TV interviews that they were doing. And in the background, you can see a password on a Post-it note on someone's screen. Single-factor authentication is dead. It should not be used for any systems anymore. And the average user has been going through this through their home systems, through their personal email systems as well. They should be expecting this. Bandwidth, the bandwidth bleed. What we're dealing with is traffic spikes during sporting events, not just people watching sporting events, but people betting on sporting events. This is a global problem. You've got increased gambling. When you have increased gambling, you of course have legitimate gambling sites that are legally run, but then you have the illegally or gray gambling sites that may be run in other countries. And is that really allowed or not in your country as it is? When you're having gambling systems like that, you're going to have fake gambling sites or illegal or fraud gambling sites as well, where they make it look like you're doing real gambling, but in fact, the payout will never happen. So they're taking your money, taking more money, and then holding on to it. And of course, when it comes to just watching sports online, there's been a huge crackdown on pirated sports broadcasts, particularly around the international football and FIFA and that. A lot of these international sports are really coming down hard on people that are watching these sporting events illegally. And this is, again, spawning off these other sites where people may be trying to go in to watch sports, and they're being served ads. They're being served drive-by downloads. They're being served this information that can compromise their computers from it. And you can actually see this was from Cloudflare. This was for the US Super Bowl, just as an example. And you can see the spikes of DNS traffic showing people that were either not using their devices at certain times, like at the halftime show, or when there's certain events, going on social media, going on betting sites, and placing wagers on different parts of the event. All of these things, the increased gambling, the pirated sports broadcasts, it all leads to threat vectors for malware coming into systems. They burn your bandwidth, they introduce risk. One of the easiest ways to block a lot of these things is DNS filtering. DNS filtering is great from a whole range of different mechanisms and threat vectors that you might have, because by doing filtering at the DNS level, you're actually blocking the connections even before a TCP three-way handshake. You know, there's no longer of waiting to see the traffic and inspect the traffic and determine whether it's good or not. If there is a domain name that is known to only be for malicious or only for gambling or only for pirated sites, blocking that domain connection allows you to block all traffic going to that system. This is one of the great things, not just in corporate and education institutes, but this is great even for home users as well. You just change your DNS server to a different DNS provider, and you can customize block lists that are there. Also, relatively cheap. Running up your own DNS filtering on your own DNS servers, really easy. For home use, people can even use Raspberry Pis and run the Pi-hole software as well. Network hygiene. This is the bit that I was talking about before about network segmentation and that. A flat open network is an invitation for a ransomware outbreak. This is where we're talking where different computers can talk to each other directly on a local network without going out through a gateway or other system like that. This means if any one of them were to be compromised, that the infection can spread from one to the other on that local network because they're allowed to talk to each other. You need to look at what devices can see and what they should be able to see. There's simple settings that you can do even for Wi-Fi networks that says that clients on a Wi-Fi network cannot talk to each other. They do not have the visibility. The only way out is out through a system. In most Wi-Fi networks, that's how they should be operating. But then you get down to physical networks. You look down to, the actual, Ethernet cabled computers. A lot of them are wide open. Every computer can talk to every other computer. When you're looking at endpoints, desktops, laptops, they generally don't need to talk to each other. They talk through services. They talk through mail services, chat services, external gateways. They don't talk directly one to another. So why should they be able to talk to each other? You need to run this question against all network types. If you do have a little bit of network segmentation already, you need to look at each one of your segments. Can clients on each of these systems talk to each other, and should they be able to talk to each other? Is there certain ones that should be limited from that? You also want to look at the segmentation, as the little funny graphic is here, single network, one big container. Once everything is in it, it's wide open. Everything can talk to each other versus all the individual locked boxes that you have here. Network segmentation brings it down to smaller pieces of networks, not just separating public Wi-Fi and students and staff and servers, but getting down to smaller individual departments. Where are you going to have to place your policy controls? Which networks are needing different controls and firewalling for it? And how can you go through and do that? And, the segmentation can get all the way down to the level of micro segmentation. And this is where you get down to individual computers having the firewall policies or access policies of where can this individual computer communicate to, and having that security policy on the device, not just on the network. That way, when the device moves from one network to another, it takes its security policy with it, combined with any network policies that might be on the network side of things as well. You have to look at what is the blast radius for your different networks. If there was some sort of malware that was to be let loose in any part of your network, where can it talk to? And you have to always be looking at things from that worst case scenario. What's the worst that can happen? If this computer were to be fully compromised and run by a criminal or a hacker, how far could they get? And you have to look at that against every computer, because every computer is having that susceptibility to compromise, whether it be ransomware, general viruses, or an attacker taking over complete control of it. On the network, that can move around a lot. And some of this is then compounded by having common administrator passwords across computers. If one computer can be compromised, and that administrator password is found, it can then instantly go administrator to every other device on the network that it can communicate with. Speaking of ransomware, we of course need to look at backups and the backup fallacy of things. Having backups is not enough. It never has been enough, but there's been a lot of reliance on, do you have backups? Yes, I have backups. And that's the end of the conversation. That is not. That is the beginning of the conversation. There is so much more to it. Testing restores of backups. That's usually the next level up from there. Do you have backups? Yes. When was the last time that you restored and tested your restore process? Oh, it was this period of time. Or the system does it automatically. The system doing automatic restore tests is not actually taking the data onto another machine and bringing it all the way up. It's just testing that it can read the information off of the backups in most cases. You need to go beyond that. You need to have the human side of things tested to make sure that the backup restores are actually possible onto brand new equipment, onto brand new either virtual machines or physical bare metal. We've also been going through the 3-2-1 backup rule, having 3 copies of data, 2 types of media, and 1 offsite copy. We really need to be going through into the 3-2-1-1-0. So it's a little bit cut off, but we can see most of it here. 3 copies of data. Remember that in the 3 copies of data, 1 copy can be your live working data. It doesn't mean 3 backups. It means 3 copies, 1 of them being live running data. 2 different storage media. The storage media that we're looking at here, one of them really should be immutable in one way or another. This means that the criminals and the attackers breaking into systems cannot change the backup for one of these types of media. This may mean worm drives, the write once, read many, where even the administrators cannot change the backup. It's the actual media itself that stops it from being changed. External tapes that are taken out of systems, that's one way to do it as well. But if the tape is left in a tape changer, into a tape carousel, if you can go through and extract the tape and delete it, an attacker can also go through, extract the tape and delete it as well. So when I talk about tapes in this purpose, I mean tapes that are literally taken out of a machine, put in their little cases, and put away in a secure storage location. For secure storage locations, you need to have an offsite copy of your data, whether it be offsite backups or an offsite live copy of data needs to be done as well. If you keep everything in one location and that location disappears because of floods, fires, cyclones, earthquakes, lava flows, or just civil distress, you don't want to lose everything. So a lot of places will have 2 live running copies at 2 different data centers. Great, that's the physical side of things. You need an offline air-gapped backup. This is the one not just for natural disasters, this is the one blocking against criminals and hackers that are breaking into your systems. And of course, the 0 is you need to be testing for 0 errors. You need to test all of these backups, all of these copies of data to make sure that the data is bit for bit exact replicas, no errors, and able to be retrieved. Also remembering, of course, if you're storing data for a long period of time, because you're required to under certain laws and regulations, some storage media has a lifespan. Have you looked at how you're going to rotate and pull the data off of those old backups and put it onto new media? Tapes do last long, but they don't last forever. CDs and DVDs, they last long, but not forever. Even USB drives do not last forever. You cannot guarantee after a certain number of years that the data will always be there. Needs to be tested, needs to be rotated through onto new storage media. And that is usually something that nobody wants to think about. And they think, I won't be working here anymore by the time it becomes a problem. So what about your predecessors? What about the people that worked before you and are saying it's no longer their problem because they've retired and they've handed it over to you? Do you have old backups that you have to legally keep, but you can't read them anymore? What about even tape media that you don't even have the drives for because you've been changing to new tape technologies? And just a fun one beyond the previous one. It's a data breach. No, it's an unintended offsite backup. The other funny one is ransomware is third-party surprise encryption. So yeah, you can try and look at it on the bright side, but in the end, data breaches are data breaches, and ransomware is a loss of your data. And what we're looking at now is we're not just looking at ransomware coming in and encrypting your hard drives. We're looking at criminals breaking into your network, dwelling on your network, sometimes for 2 weeks or 2 months. One of the things they're doing is they're looking for critical systems. They're looking for data that would be useful or worth money, but they're also looking for your backups. They're disabling your antivirus. They're disabling your backups. They're deleting your backups so that when they do encrypt and ransomware your servers and your systems, you have to pay them money if you want a copy of your data back. External offline backups are a must to deal with these situations. Okay, looking at the future. Interesting quote here from George Burns. I look to the future because that's where I'm going to have to spend the rest of my life. If we don't look at the future now, if we don't plan for the future, if we don't make changes to the way that we're managing our systems right now for the future is going to catch up really quickly, and we're going to be unprepared. You'll have to excuse a little bit of this. In my master's degree that I'm just finishing up, one of my most recent subjects was on cyber warfare and cyber terrorism. So I have to throw in a little bit about cyber warfare because it's been on my mind so much lately. So a lot of the criminal activity on the internet used to be about making quick money. What's the fastest way that they can come in and make money? It doesn't have to be guaranteed for everybody, but a certain percentage of their victims will pay money, and boom, that's how they get through and make it. State actors are moving to disruption, influence, and intellectual property theft. Some of this has been happening in different ways. A lot of it is happening online at the moment now. Universities are seen as soft targets for nation states. Soft targets as there isn't a lot of blowback. It's separate enough from governments. But if there's a large enough attack, it could destabilize a country, disrupting research and spreading misinformation and disinformation. Non-state actors are also being more bold in their actions. A lot of these younger criminals or criminals from other countries that are just doing things on their own are taking a lot more risks. They're doing a lot more things and charging or, ransoming a lot more money. And they're making these things a very big problem. We saw that in Australia. Over the past 3-4 years, we've had many large data breaches and attacks against our private health insurance systems, against our major telcos, and a lot of these core infrastructure systems within our economy in Australia. Some of these were literally done by a small group of attackers of maybe 2 or 3, and when they realized how much force the Australian police and government was throwing to come after them, some of them just threw up their hands and said, "No, we're sorry. Here's the information back. Please don't try and track us down anymore." They aborted the whole ransom payment aspect of it, and they said, "Look, we don't want this sort of trouble." They weren't really certain about what they were getting themselves into with the illegal activity that they were doing. We also have AI-driven threats. A lot of these have been seen. A lot of these have been projected. There's a lot of things that we may not even see as coming 6 months from now until we start seeing the threats evolving. This space is evolving so quickly in both the legitimate uses of AI, but also a lot of these threat vectors that we're seeing as well. AI creates faster. It iterates faster. It doesn't sleep. When you look at how quickly an LLM can generate source code and how quickly it can test and go through and adapt it and modify it, debug it, come up with new versions, it's incredible to think of what they can do in parallel with so many more systems. We, of course, see phishing emails. Phishing emails can be more perfect. We used to have phishing emails that were coming through with spelling mistakes and that, and grammar mistakes, changing from different languages and the translation not being exact. The LLMs are giving better email phishing creation ability. Now, I also say not just be more perfect, but also more imperfect. There's some belief that phishing emails have mistakes in them on purpose so that smart people can identify the phishing email and mark it as phishing and delete it and get rid of it. The purpose of phishing email is they want to find gullible people. They want to find people that will fall for the phishing email and they will hand over money and they're not going to think critically. So there's some belief that a lot of these phishing emails have bad grammar in them. They have mistakes in them on purpose so that the only people that are following through are people that aren't thinking clearly or critically and will hand over money or download viruses or whatever it is that they wish to be doing. AI-driven threats can also not just be working in the background, generating these better versions all the time. They can be staying aware of current events. And as soon as something happens, whether it be a political change, elections, weather, you've got natural disasters, when anything like this happens, they can pick up on that and instantly incorporate that into their phishing emails as part of their lures that they use in their emails. It doesn't even take a human to think and to try and search and read the news. These AI systems are able to collect this information and generate custom phishing lures for particular audiences and targeting for localities. AI is also going to be very fast at fuzzing against web apps. And this was not just going to be the regular fuzzing of trying everything until something fails, but it's going to be more intelligent. It's going to look at the error codes. It's going to be thinking like a security professional, and it's going to be able to go in and make changes to its code and make changes to the tests. We're going to see these systems being very powerful in the right hands for finding vulnerabilities. But of course, in the wrong hands, the finding of vulnerabilities quickly leads to the exploitation of those vulnerabilities, causing compromises to computers and networks. We've also had polymorphic malware in the past where it changes. We're going to see true polymorphic. This is where the AI is purposefully going to be making changes, testing against many different antivirus signatures, and making sure that it can generate ones that aren't being seen. Antivirus software has always been a bit of an arms race. Who can, come up with the signatures faster? We're going to be getting to the point where the signatures aren't going to matter at all. The polymorphic changes to the binaries and the hashes are going to be so important that we have to move to behavioral analysis, or else you are not going to catch the malware that's coming into your systems. That behavioral analysis is not just the user behavior analysis, but the binary behavior analysis. Why is this program on the computer reading every single file through every folder on a hard drive? Is this doing something? Why is it making changes? Identifying ransomware, identifying malware on a system by the way that that software is behaving. And if you're not using these types of behavior analysis systems now, you're going to fall behind when this comes through in even harder effect. We're also going to be seeing integrity attacks more. This is some of the scary stuff. This is almost to the level of insider threats that keeps me awake a lot at night. We've paid a lot of attention to protecting the confidentiality and the availability of data and systems. What we haven't been paying enough attention to is the integrity of systems. Integrity of data, integrity of configuration files as well. So what if threat actors move from encrypting hard drives and deleting databases to modifying information? They come in, they modify student grades. They modify and alter the results of multi-year research studies. What you end up with is, over a long period of time, if these don't get detected because there's small changes along the way, you end up with students that you're not even certain that they should have graduated and have a degree. You're going to have research studies that their data may have been modified along the way that is way off from the baseline and where the actual research information was come from. These things can completely destroy the reputation of an educational institute or research institute. And if this happens again and again, the whole organization is going to be completely under dispute. Integrity monitoring and hashing are valuable tools. Encryption can be useful in certain circumstances, but can make reading difficult. There is homomorphic encryption that is being researched and is almost out there for practical applications. We have to be looking at these ways of being able to keep the integrity of data, as well as keeping track of changes to the data over time. So if needed, you can always roll it back. But these are key things. We sort of assume that if we have good security, if we haven't had a compromise, that the data is pristine, but it may not be. It might just be that you haven't detected the actual compromise and therefore haven't detected what changes have happened from there. And of course, supply chain poisoning. I mentioned this before, where you sort of sit in that middle of supply chain. You can be seen as a supply chain up to government and down to vendors. You need to trust software from vendors, but what if the vendor gets compromised? What if the update that comes through is the malware? Big systems, library systems, student management systems, a lot of this software may not be developed with the right levels of security in mind, but you're sort of trusting that the vendor is doing the right thing. You may have done an assessment of the vendor when you purchased the software 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but what are they doing now? What is their security posture now? Have they been keeping up with the changes for security and the changing for the requirements for compliance and everything that I've been talking about in this presentation so far? You have to make sure that your vendors that are selling you software, that are selling you updates, that are selling you that code and information, that they are keeping the same or higher levels of security standards that you are doing for your own organizations yourself. If not, the supply chain is going to be that weakness coming into your systems and into your networks, controlling your information. You also have to look not just at the big systems like those management systems, but the smaller systems all the way down to browser extensions. Every year, there's repeated cases of browser extension companies being bought, sold, or being compromised and having their browser extensions hijacked to introduce malware and information stealing malware into browsers on systems. Of course, referring back to network segmentation as far as the blast radius, if you have these vendors that are giving you software, are they limited? Are they limited in other systems that they can talk to? If you have a student management system, can it talk to other systems that you have? Ones that it should or should not be allowed to connect to. You also have to look, a lot of these systems will come out with installation guides that say, oh, you cannot firewall, or you must disable antivirus for this software to work correctly. How insane is that, that they can't even tell you what ports they should be using on the network, or that antivirus software is interfering with their software? This is 2026. None of that should be possible. And of course, demanding transparency from vendors and performing vendor security assessments. Asking your vendors on a regular basis, annually at least, what is your security posture? What are your security policies? How do you do secure software development? What happens if there's an incident? How will we be notified? How do you respond to an incident? And making sure that their level of security and that their security procedures are in line with yours as well. And if not, how can you manage that risk? Of course, managing risk of vendors can be done many different ways, by identifying competition that they can be looking at, or network segmentation and that sort of limiting of the blast radius, that if something goes wrong with this vendor software, how can we limit the extent of damage that it may cause? So the way forward, governance is the human firewall. You have to make sure that you are not just focusing on the technical aspect of security defenses. You have to be looking at the governance and policy aspect for it as well. You have to be multifaceted in your security defense. Policies make technology stronger. By having policies, it allows you to define what is expected behavior and what is not allowed on certain systems. It also allows you to classify data and then classify and prioritize security time and resources. If you don't have the policies that you have to classify systems and put them to different levels for responses, then how do you focus your security defensive efforts? Where do you go? Where do you spend your time? What is a priority? You don't know because you may not have it defined out through classifications. Going through, another thing to look at is assumed breach. This is, again, something that has been around in large organizations for several years now, but not every organization or institute has picked up on this. You have to be designing your systems and your networks to assume you have criminals and hackers inside your network right now. If you cannot find bad activity in your network right now, that's something that you have to look at. That is a change because bad activity is happening. And if it's not happening now, it will be happening very soon. It can be one of those blind spot things that if you're not looking for bad activity, you can say, oh, bad activity isn't happening. But if you don't have perfect visibility, how can you say that bad activity isn't happening? Hunting for bad activity on your network is a great next level for security operations. Not just looking at alerts for things that are currently alerting, but actually hunting for bad activity. Back to the networking side, kill the flat network. If you have wide open flat networks, even if you have, a few segments across the way, if each segment is very large, thousands of devices, that is essentially a flat network. Each one of your segments could be very wide open. Kill the flat network, segment aggressively, stop client-to-client communication wherever possible, not just on Wi-Fi, but on the cabled networks as well. Verify identities, moving towards zero trust. Use strong authentication, and don't allow any weak authentication points in any aspects of your network. Go through all areas of authentication and make sure that they are all coming up to the standard that you set for standard authentication on your network. And don't accept vendors that don't align with your requirement for strong authentication. And protect your research. This can be one of those scary points that you may not want to admit this to your governments. I've been in that case myself in the past. But you may wish to consider your networks as part of critical national infrastructure. If you are having researchers performing research that will be used external to the university, it could be used in many areas that you're not expecting. That research is critical to your country. You have to be treating your networks as such. You're not just an organization that is teaching people. Research is happening. The research is valuable. The research is not just bringing money into the researchers doing it, but the use of that data is unknowingly valuable into the future. That's it for my presentation here. I just wanted to see if anyone had put questions in. Couple people asking questions. Drone being used in recent war. Yeah, well, the drone's obviously happening in Russia, Ukraine. If you've seen any of the pictures, not only are they using drones, but they have already iterated to using drones with fiber optics behind them so that they can't be remotely jammed on radio frequency communication. So you'll actually see some of these battlefields with these strings of fiber optic back and forth, not even shielded, just it looks like spider web almost, going across the treetops of having these drones going across. There was also a few months ago the case where they had a shipping container on a truck that was driven into Russia. The top opened up, all these drones came out, and they bombed a nearby Air Force base. The drone warfare is incredible in what it can do. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be coming to the research and education space, but it's that step up of thinking of how militaries have been working. You go back through time, tanks were a big thing for fighting wars. Then you had airplanes that started coming out. Airplanes, they started off not being able to do much, a bit of shooting and airplane to airplane. Then you got airplanes with missiles. They could do air to surface shooting or air to air shooting. You then started having ground defense to shoot down airplanes, but we're still dealing with a small number of airplanes. You go back to 1,000 drones coming at you at once. How are you going to defend against so many things, like a swarm of them coming in? How are you going to defend against that on an information technology and security aspect? What is it going to be when it's no longer hands on a keyboard that is manually hacking into a system? What is it going to be when you have thousands of AI agents that don't have to sleep, that can just continuously iterate on scanning, automatically detecting, doing these penetration tests, and actually breaking into your systems? At the moment, it's not yet the fully automated stage, but we are not far away from it. The incredible speed of development right now is unfathomable of what's going to happen in even just 6 months from now and where we're going to be. There could be changes so much that you'll look back at this and go, well, why didn't we predict this? And it's because things are changing so quickly. Someone else asking, what's the problem with SMS OTP authentication? For starters, SMS one-time passwords are not phishing resistant. There's been many cases where criminals will find someone's phone number and they'll send an SMS to you first and say, hi, it's such and such from the bank. There's been unusual activity on your bank account. To verify that you are in control of your bank account, we're going to send you a code. Reply back to here. Otherwise, we're going to cancel your account and shut down your services. Then they go in, they try and do the recover account. It sends you an SMS code from the real bank. So you take that code, you go back to the other SMS message, and you reply with the message. You send the code straight back to the criminals. This is happening. And the reason why is because humans are fallible. By nature, we do not always think critically. You could be catching somebody at 6 o'clock in the morning, getting a message on their phone, not thinking clearly. And if you say the right things, if you give them enough of a sense of urgency and that there's going to be consequences if they don't do it quickly, they'll do whatever you tell them to. And that's a problem. Phishing resistant SMS is not a thing. SMS is always going to be susceptible to phishing attacks. The only way to get phishing resistant two-factor is to have cryptographically signed keys, public-private keys, that are only held by the organization that you are authenticating to. So the UB keys and the FIDO2, the way it works is that if I'm trying to log into Google, Google generates that public-private key for the URL of Google's authentication server. Now, you can do a whole bunch of URL tricks, GOOOGLE.com, but when it comes to cryptographic checks, it'll look at the exact URL. And it doesn't care about what a human sees. It looks down to the binary of, is this URL the exact URL? Or is it a different domain that a human might think is different? One of the other tricks is using a lowercase r and a lowercase n And when you put the R and N together, it can look like an M. Microsoft, but in reality, it's RN Microsoft. To a human, you may not see that, and you may just enter in your username and password. But to these cryptographic keys, it doesn't match the public-private key. Doesn't match the URL. They can't present with the public key, so your private key won't match to them. And that's the way to do phishing resistant. That's where passkeys is. But passkeys is software and can be a little bit fiddly. You have to support it more. The physical devices is where it is. Physical devices cost a bit of money and can be tricky to get it out to people. That's why a lot of universities don't use the physical devices for students, but they may use it for staff, or they may use it for sensitive staff, the admin staff, the finance staff, vice chancellor, things like that. Someone else asking a question here, is Google Authenticator good? So Google Authenticator, when I mentioned it before, Google Authenticator is one piece of software that implements a standard type of two-factor authentication called TOTP, or time-based one-time protocol, or one-time password. There's Google Authenticator. Microsoft has an authenticator. There's one called Authy. There's so many different ones that all implement the same standard. So when I say Google Authenticator, I mean the whole collection of all of them. They are good, but in reality, I used to work for Google when two-factor was created and put through after they were hacked by China. Technically, these time-based one-time protocols that are on your phone are not actually two-factor authentication. They're two-step verification. And this is a really interesting small differentiator here, is that the way that you create that two-factor code on your phone is you enter in a string or you scan a QR code, right? That's considered the seed for that time-based generator. You take that seed and then you apply the current time, and it generates that changing 6-digit code. The 6-digit code will always be the same if it's based on the same seed. So if right now I were to bring up an account and I were to create a Google Authenticator code from it, and if every one of you were to scan the same QR code and add it into your phone as well, every single phone in this room would generate the same number at the same time. So that seed is basically like a password, isn't it? We're starting back to something that you know. You have this seed. If your phone were to get infected with malware or attacked by criminals, if they're able to extract that seed, they can extract it, put it in their own device, and now generate the exact same 6-digit codes at the exact same time. So while it looks like it's a second factor, it looks like it's a physical device in my hand generating a 6-digit code, that 6-digit code started with a string of text that is essentially a password. And that's why it's considered, in a strict sense, two-step verification. Because it's the same type of verification. It's something you know the password. It just so happens that the password goes into a piece of software that generates a time-based code. True two-factor is something where it's a physical device that has to be separate to the thing that you know is the password. Push authentication, which is separate to Google Authenticator, push authentication is more that two-factor because it's software that has to be installed on your device, and it proves that it can only be installed on an authorized device. So that's a bit better in the actual two factors of things that we're looking at. So if anybody uses Okta, Okta is a very popular one that does that push authentication. Some Microsoft systems that Microsoft does it themselves, they can do push authentication as well. The other thing that you have to look at is if you're dealing with an identity management system and it allows multiple ways to do authentication, if SMS is one of them, the criminals will always fall back to that SMS. If one of them is that Google Authenticator and they can always extract that out, it'll always fall back. So if you are using a system where you can use a YubiKey for secure cryptographic two-factor authentication, but the fallback is SMS, from a criminal's point of view, they know they can't hack this, so they're just going to say, authenticate a different way, boom, SMS. Boom, they're going to hit you that way as well. So not only do you have to look at raising your two-factor authentication to something stronger that is phishing resistant, you have to make sure you disable the weak authentication mechanisms as well. You know, there's still some systems out on the internet that use secret questions or knowledge-based questions to reset accounts. You know, what was the name of your first school that you went to? What car did you use when you learned how to drive? What's your mother's maiden name? You know, and again, if that's an option, that's the weakest link. That's where the criminals are going to come in through. So you have to think like a criminal when you're assessing your systems. You can't just say, we've deployed YubiKeys and now we're secure. Well, no, you've hit the high end of security, but what's the weakest link that you've got left in your authentication scheme? You have to look down to that. Someone else asking a question. Is it wise to use open source firewall, as most of the institutions in the country running budget constraints to afford licensed firewall? Absolutely. Open source firewalls are great. You know, they at the core of what they do, they are firewalling traffic. There's two things that you really have to look at with firewalls. What is the feature set that they're using? And where is the management interface? There have been, I can't even count how many firewall vulnerabilities there have been in the past year or two. You know, tens and tens of vulnerabilities. But almost all of them have been impacting the management interface for the firewall. If your firewall can be managed from the internet, there's a problem. Because if you can manage it from the internet, criminals can hack it from the internet. Your firewall management interface needs to be on the inside, protected by like VPNs or, you know, other sorts of secure authentication or physical hands on a keyboard. So that's one aspect, is the way that you actually deploy the firewall and how you manage it. The other aspect is when it comes down to feature sets. What do you want your firewall to do? And this is where a lot of the big, expensive commercial firewalls, this is where they come in. They offer all of these extra features, and you have to pay not just for the firewall, you have to pay for an annual subscription for these features and for the software that's running on top of it. You want to look at what features do you need, what features are available. There's great open source firewalls out there. You also have to look at, can it scale up? Can you run it on large enough equipment and interfaces for the speed of traffic that you need? And if not, it might just be an architecture decision. Instead of one big firewall with all of the networks coming out from it, maybe you break it down into smaller firewalls that are each one physically for different segments on your network. It may mean the hardware is a little bit more. It may mean the management is a little bit harder because they're individual, but you have to look at the architecture. If you can run one physical server with very high-speed interfaces and do it all through there, great. But that, again, physical, you know, architecture may be something that has to change. But yeah, you know, there's absolutely good open source firewalls that are out there that you can use. You know, there's all the way down to home use. People are taking, what is it, Netgear routers and flashing with WRT, is it? I don't use it personally, but you can run this great open source firewall software on your home routers in order to do all these fancy features there as well. So why not? I remember when Juniper was a new company, and they were running on FreeBSD. You know, you could actually take apart a Juniper router and connect into it, and it was literally running FreeBSD. So if you were to get the software package for the Juniper routers, you could install it on your own FreeBSD machine and run your own router on just home grade hardware. So yeah, it was great. It's not like that anymore, but essentially it was. Um, so that's all the questions that we've got for there. I think it's break time, isn't it? 3. Yeah, I've gone a little bit over, but it's all good. We are continuing this session after the afternoon coffee break. So I think we've got 20 minutes or so for a coffee break. After this session, we're doing another security one, and I'm doing it a little bit different. One that I think is quite interesting. It's a choose what you want to learn. So I've got 12 topics that are prepared. I've got 12 presentations on my laptop ready to go. We're going to put up another Slido interface. Instead of just for questions, this one is asking you to vote on which topics you think is most interesting that you want me to present. And whoever's in the room, when it comes to voting, you vote, and the top 1 or 2, depending how quickly I talk, the top 1 or 2 will be what I present for the next session. So I can't tell you what I'm presenting at the next session other than majority rules for what I present on the next session. There's some that are personally interesting. There's some that are technology interesting. We'll see where it goes. So make sure that you come back after the coffee break. So it's about 10 past 3 at the moment. I think things start back up at 3 o'clock, 3:30, right? Cool. So if you could be